Hey, what's up? Dave with Brazos Valley Strength. And today we're going to be talking about why your hips rise in the squat and what we can do to fix it. So as usual, we need to start off with some definitions or kind of what I'm going to be talking about when I use certain terms. So in this case, mostly the muscles in relation to the squat are going to be really important. We're also going to be framing this whole conversation around the low bar squat. I'm going to contextualize that a little bit, but just to be clear, when I'm saying squat, I'm generally going to be talking about low bar squat. Pretty much everything that I say in this video will apply to high bar, whatever squat that you're doing, but just some things will be swayed a little bit more towards back strength or just those kind of positions overall. So to start off with, the main things that I'm going to be saying is if I'm talking about leg strength, I'm just going to be talking about quads. I think I'll say quads most of the time, but leg strength is really just knee extension strength is really what I'm talking about. Back strength is going to be a big one. And I think back strength is probably going to be the most vague here. It's going to be all of the muscles in your back, but even more so than that, I think probably I'm going to say back strength a lot, but it's going to be everything in relation to trunk posture and trunk rigidity. So within this, there's kind of an assumption that you know how to brace and kind of use the ribcage down position and be able to expand into the belt and all of that kind of stuff. If you're unfamiliar with that, within my How to Low Bar Squat Complete Guide, there's a bracing video there. I probably just need to post that video separately, but that section of the video is going to be really, really important for all this. So if I'm saying back strength, let's just think about general rigidity and posture and the ability to maintain neutrality within the trunk. I may say extension sometimes, and even there I'm talking about working towards neutral, kind of away from rounding and fighting for that neutral position rather than a more rounded over position. And very rarely do we actually want to be in extension. So back strength and extension, mostly just working towards a neutral, solid, braced position of the trunk. I think it's important here also to talk about what hip extension demands are really there in the squat. The hamstrings are not going to be a big part of this. Glutes sort of, but I think a lot of times people think too much of what the hamstrings are really doing when the adductors are probably doing what people think that the hamstrings are doing in hip extension. So when you get sore in, let's say, your posterior side of your legs, mostly on the insides, but kind of wrapping around to the back, that's usually your adductors. It doesn't really matter here, but your hamstrings do not contribute a lot actively to hip extension in the squat. And for the most part, it's going to be your adductors, especially at really deep positions. Your glutes, definitely some, but I don't think that hip extension demands in the squat are really all that important, because by the time it really matters, within the context of this video, we'll elaborate here too, but by the time that it really matters, the demands of the squat have kind of gotten small enough that we're almost never going to fail from hip extension. It's usually going to be leg strength. And so I think the best way that I'm going to try to describe this whole concept is essentially that your back and to some degree hip extension, those are sort of a constant. And the variable that we have is going to be our quad strength. And I guess more so than that, the position and the angle that we get into, how much knee flexion that we have at the bottom, how much forward knee travel that we have at all, that's going to be kind of our main variable that we really are going to look at as far as the strength that we have available to us. The back strength to me is going to be relatively constant. And it's very, very rare that people do fail because their back is not strong enough. It happens. It does happen, but I think that it's going to show up a little bit differently than the hips moving back. So how do we identify if it's going to be leg strength, quad strength, or our backs failing? And this part is going to be relatively easy. So I think if we look at like a front squat or a high bar squat, most of the time we see those failures happen because of back strength. Because the further the bar moves forward and anteriorly, it's going to make it harder for our back to maintain that extension. So most of the time when we fail front squats, it's going to be the bar kind of rolling forward. High bar squats, very similarly, people are usually able to maintain a pretty good posture, but that the demands from their hip to the barbell end up getting too high and their back rounds. Now, I do think part of this is because the quads end up failing to some degree, but when the hips shift back on the high bar squat, that distance from the hip to the barbell increases, right? The more upright you are, then your hip, that moment right there is gonna be smaller. So it's easier for your back to maintain that posture, but when your hips shift back, your back fails. So if we had infinite strength in the legs, then we wouldn't fail so much in the back. The demands there wouldn't be quite so high, but that's just not true. It's going to be much easier for most people in a low bar squat position to maintain the integrity of their trunk more so than just get their quads strong enough to be able to overcome those demands. So that's why we see the low bar squat being so popular amongst powerlifters, and just most very strong squatters are using the low bar squat position. It's because of all this, that by moving the bar down on the back, we're really decreasing the demands of the back to maintain that neutrality, maintain that extension overall. And so from there, we are reducing that segment of the body being a main reason that we're going to fail. So we're going to fail because of leg strength. So we're going to talk about all that. Leg strength is going to be the main focus here. But when I asked for questions on Instagram with this, I think a lot of the comments kind of alluded to the fact that I think people kind of know that it's not that simple. That people were kind of implying that you know, their understanding was that balance, coordination, trying to be too upright, too much extension, all of those things create problems here as well. And they absolutely do. So that's what we're gonna look at first, and then we're gonna circle back to the quad stuff. So I sort of already made this video a little bit, but we're gonna frame it a little bit differently. When I talked about what best shoe to wear in squatting, a lot of it was this stuff, was that people are trying to put too much emphasis into being too upright and have too much forward knee travel because they've heard that stronger quads, being more upright, is always going to be better. But the problem is that we're shifting into a muscle that probably does not have quite the same capacity as our backs do, or just kind of that posterior shift, our ability to maintain our integrity of that position and get the most out of our quads. And that's the important thing. So I think the way to frame what I'm trying to say here is a leg press versus a hack squat. So both of these do train the quads very, very hard. We're taking out the demands of hip extension, of back stability. Neither one of them has the ability for you to fail because of your back strength or hip extension strength. It's always going to be your knee extension strength. But almost always, the leg press is going to be one that can be loaded significantly more. And it's pretty easy to look at the reasons why. With a hack squat, we're going to have a lot more forward knee travel, and we're going to have a much more difficult, we'll call it sticking point in the middle. When the knee is around that 90-degree angle or so, it's still very, very far forward, and it's all around the quad. Whereas with the leg press, we're not really struggling quite so much in that area because we have our hips more shifted back. We're in a really strong position to be able to drive with the knee, and there's just not quite as sharp of an angle, especially through that mid-range portion of the squat. So if we look at that as kind of our basis here, putting ourselves in a position to where we just use more quads is not really all that good if we're trying to make it harder and harder on the quads. So we're looking for efficiency. We're not looking to be in a position to where I just use my legs the best, because being in a position that just makes it very hard on the quads is not really a good thing. But absolutely, we want to be in a position to where we can maximize the relationship between how strong the legs can be and the ability for your back to maintain its position so that we can effectively drive the total amount of force that we have as our capability into the barbell. So at a certain point, for sure, if my hips move too far back and I get into a very good morning position and my knees are starting to get pretty straight, yeah, I need to be in a better position and get my knees more forward and fight for that position. And sure, my back can fail in a low bar squat. So I'm not at all advocating to get into that position whatsoever. But as people pointed out on Instagram, having your hips shift back at the start of the squat in the first place isn't necessarily a horrible thing in the beginning, because we do need to just stand up. And if my back, by shifting backwards a little bit, I have the ability to still stand up with the squat, that's definitely better than not. So it's okay to utilize the increased ability that I have in my back to be able to get up, but we do want to long-term be able to create a good, efficient position. So first and foremost, I think the main thing that we need to take inventory of is what we're doing with our brace. And I've talked about this in many other videos, but if you are working too much towards extension in the upper back and really fighting for that big chest position and a really big arch position, you're actively moving away from a good braced position. So at that point, you are going to be seeing some pretty big limitations in your trunk's ability to maintain its extension strength. And so I think a lot of times that's gonna show up in more of like the backgrounding stuff, but a lot of times for people that are moving in that direction, that are fighting a lot for extension and fighting hard to be really upright, we end up getting a shift forward. And it shows up in a number of ways, but if the bar translates really far over the knees, then, or over the feet, I guess, then in that position, we're always gonna shift back, right? Because the weight of the barbell being in front of our base of support is not gonna be a position that we can maintain. Stuff is definitely gonna dump forward. We're gonna have problems there if the center of mass drifts forward. I don't think that that really is the most common way that people have issues here. I think most people are sort of aware that they do want the bar to be on top of midfoot overall. But the issue is that people can create that position with too much forward knee travel. So a lot of times people start squatting and they think, oh, I need to wear weightlifting shoes. I need to get my heels on so that I get my knees more forward and really utilize my legs and be really, really upright. But if we look at this from a side angle position, we can see how much more forward knee travel I'm getting relative to that hip position. And I'm just gonna be in a position to where I am overutilizing my legs or requiring too much from my legs when I still have much, much more capacity in my back that I'm not taking advantage of. So if we think of it as like a percentage thing, if I'm doing so much to where I'm requiring 100% of my legs ability, but I'm only around like, I don't know, I'll just make a number at 25% of my back's ability, that's probably a bad thing. So we do want to find a position to where I'm always utilizing kind of all the strength that I have available in my legs, but getting closer and closer to where my back is also working very, very hard is going to be the most efficient position to where I can move the most amount of weight. So finding kind of that balance position. If it's all quads and very little back demands, you're just not gonna be lifting as much weight as you can. So finding a more balanced position to challenge both of those positions pretty evenly will get the most out of your squat kind of initially and long-term overall. So in this very forward knee position, lots of times we see the hips kind of abruptly shoot back. And then we have, other back failures or things like that happen. But my argument here is in the first place that we could have just set up a better, more balanced position and really just not pushed quite so far forward with the knees to really challenge that position overall. So the first place to start, if your hips are shifting back, is just going to be taking inventory of how much you're really trying to use your legs in the first place and how upright that you are. If you're really overdoing those things, that's the problem. For sure, long-term, getting your quads stronger is going to give you a huge amount of returns here. But putting yourself in that position to where you're always requiring the absolute most out of your quads and just challenging yourself just more and more and more in that position is just not efficient. It's the same thing as doing like a close grip bench press or something. It's pretty easy to just widen your grip, allow other muscles to pick up some of the slack, and then you're just gonna basically be instantly stronger. So what can I do to hopefully find a good position to understand kind of what fits my body naturally? And I think that's the starting point right there, is just that we're trying to find a natural, even position for your body to move in, a good balance between the knees and the hips. And I think for people, even people that squat in heels, a lot of times I encourage people to warm up in flats because it gives people a better awareness of their balance, of their center of mass. And definitely emphasizing a little bit of a hinge during warm-ups. I encourage people, you'll see this in the bracing video, to do things like goblet squats with kind of rounding the upper back and emphasizing more of that kind of hinge position so that I can feel myself balanced on top of my feet. If you're a long-time viewer of the channel, this next segment might be kind of funny to you, but I think a really good exercise, especially in warm-ups, is what Joe Sullivan calls a segmented squat. I think this is actually a pretty good exercise here. So starting off with a nice hinge position to where you're hopefully going to maintain that balance position through the entire rep. So think of it like a leg press. In the leg press, we kind of maintain that trunk angle for the whole thing, and we're just making the sled come on top of our body, and we're just driving really, really hard with our legs. That's basically what we're trying to do here. So I'm not advocating for hips really far back, but finding a position with the hips to where you can naturally and evenly descend on top of your feet and not really need a whole lot of angle change with the hips, I think is a really, really good exercise to use, especially as warm-ups, to find that position. And I think emphasizing a little bit more head down and things like that can help people really feel the awareness that they need on their feet and their balance. Almost everyone, as things get heavier, are going to need a little bit more head up position just to have a little bit more proprioception kind of ability to fight for their upper back against the barbell. It's gonna be heavy. We do have to be able to fight for that. But early on, starting in that good position to where we can make it really simple and efficient, I think is a good thing. Now, I do think that some people overdo that kind of like pre-hinged position up top, especially if we start seeing a negative shin angle. If at the top of the squat, the shins are tilted back, then a lot of times that's gonna create problems as well because we'll rock forward. So we still need to make sure that we're balanced on top of the feet, but having a nice, efficient, natural hinge at the top of the squat is really, really good. So I don't think that when we're cueing the squat, that we should be deliberately pushing back the hips or deliberately driving the knees forward hard in either direction. We should be in a pretty natural position so that I can descend evenly on top of my feet and maintain that kind of nice coordination between everything. So for most people, if they're fighting to be too upright, if they're too extended, all of that, I don't usually tell them to push their hips back. I basically just say, stop thinking about it. Stop thinking about the big chest. Stop trying to be too upright. Draw more awareness to your feet, make sure you're bracing, and most of the time the upper body stuff, that natural kind of balance position, will take care of itself if you just stop forcing it. And finally, yeah, we just need to get your quad stronger. So it would be a surprise to me if I found out that I misled a large portion of people and that they weren't getting enough back work and that their backs were too weak to maintain that position. I would be surprised by that. But I do think that almost everyone getting their quad stronger will go a really, really long way. So we have to have the balance position, but the quads almost certainly long-term will be the weakness here. So doing things like hack squats and belt squats and leg press and leg extension, all these things to get the quads bigger and stronger absolutely are going to add long-term to the squat. For sure they are, 100%. Getting your quad stronger will help you from having your hips shift back. Absolutely they will. But I do think that too much emphasis on using the legs and fighting to have the knees more forward and just shifting too hard into that really upright position because it looks pretty or whatever, I think is a mistake that many people make. But you do need to work those quads, and finding a good balance position will allow you to equally use the capacity that your back has, and then long term, as you're increasing the ability of those quads more and more and more, then your squat will go up. Also on top of that, just being aware and drawing that kind of awareness to fight for that position out of the bottom, I think is a big deal. So like I said, it is okay if your hips are shifting back some. It's okay, you're stronger there right now. We gotta stand up. But as you're working towards getting your quad stronger, it is going to be the best thing to do to continue to fight to be able to maintain that position. We don't want to be shifting away. We don't want to be shifting back because at a certain point, you will, as your hips move really far back, you will fail because of back strength, the back extension demands. You will fail there. It's gonna happen. So getting your quads stronger and stronger and stronger will help improve your efficiency, and then you just need to learn how to fight down there. Doing things like pause squats and those kind of things. But really, one of the things I say to people all the time is just be willing to do the hard rep. When you're down there, learn to fight. Don't expect it to be easy. Sort of the same cues as deadlift off the floor, and people say patience off the floor and things like that all the time. It's kind of the same thing here with squats. It's just being very, very willing to fight for that position that you're in. And hopefully it's a balanced one that you got from this video. So if you did like this video, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you next time.